This is part 2 of our 1969 Afghanistan trip and our eventual escape from Quetta. Our bus gets chased, we are put up in an expensive hotel, and we end up travelling with the Lahore Football Team. We'd arrived in Herat and found a cheap hotel. The first step was to get some Afghanis, referred to as Afs, the Afghani currency. Normally in the East this was not a problem. One would be approached by people wishing to exchange the local currency for American dollars. This would be at a rate to our advantage. However, here, even hanging around the bazaar, it was about 20 minutes before we had an offer. And to our surprise, it was worse than the official rate, which was 179 Afs to the English pound. The bank seemed the better choice, and no risk of getting scammed. However, having found a bank, we discovered the reason for the black market rate. The exchange formalities took 2 hours. There were some very angry Australians in the bank on their way west with a vehicle. They had just discovered that the Iranian border was closed for an indefinite period due to cholera. They were arguing that they all had up-to-date cholera inoculations and certificates, but were told that that was irrelevant as they could still be carriers. And anyway, it was nothing to do with the bank, it was Iran that was preventing their transit. Later we came across some other travellers with the same problem. They had a story that a couple of German boys had tried to get across at night, but were shot and killed. It might have been true, or it might have been a story put out by the authorities to discourage such attempts. Anyway, for us it was a problem to be faced later. Herat was a fascinating place. It was situated on a fertile area, irrigated by water from the Hari Rud River. To the west was Iran. Through the centre of Afghanistan was a difficult route direct to Kabul, taken in the early 1500s by Babur, a descendant of Genghis Khan and Tamerlane, who was to become the first emperor of Mughal India. And in 2002 it was walked by Rory Stewart and the dog that followed him. However, in 1969 no regular transport took this route. Its greatest point of interest was the minaret of Jam. At the time of its construction it was the tallest minaret in the world, but not visited by a European until 1957. Numerous books and websites now describe this architectural gem. Herat had been destroyed by conquerors many times, but due to its strategic and fertile position had always been rebuilt. Since this video is the story of a journey, I will limit my descriptions to the remains left by the descendants of Tamerlane, also known as Timur. In 1405, his fourth son, Shah Rukh, ascended to his father's throne. He moved the capital of the empire from Samarkand to Herat. This started a flowering of the arts, architecture, painting and literature that lasted 100 years. A complex of buildings was commissioned by Gawhar Shad, the formidable wife of Shah Rukh, and around 1493 Sheikh Baikara built an extensive musalla, or place of prayer. At the peak there were 20 minarets. This Illustrated London News 1863 view is the earliest one available. During the years of the so-called Great Game between the British and Russian empires, the British were always wary of a Russian invasion of India via Herat and Kandahar. In 1837 the Persians, encouraged by Russia, had besieged Herat. This was ineffective, but the British occupied Herat to protect against a direct Russian invasion. The British were driven out of Afghanistan in 1842, but by then the threats to Herat had subsided. Time, earthquakes and warfare damaged many of the buildings and their minarets. An 1885 illustration shows that by then Baikara's musalla was in a bad state, and in addition the British, against the wishes of the Herati people, levelled the remains to provide a clear line of fire against a new possible Russian invasion, leaving only 9 minarets. The invasion never came, but by 1969 there were only 6 minarets left. This included the 4 great minarets of the Musalla, which is still the most prominent feature of the city, and our first target to visit. It was only a short walk. On the way we examined Gawhar Shad's mausoleum. Its ribbed dome is similar to that of the tomb of Tamerlane in Samarkand. Gawashad's two minarets luckily still retained a significant part of their exquisite tile decoration. Unfortunately, one of them was later reduced to a stump during the Russian occupation of 1979 to 1989. At the time of our visit, one of these minarets had been built into a school. The children came rushing out. This photo was taken just before they started energetically throwing stones. We beat a hasty retreat and proceeded in the direction of the Musalla. Its minarets had also received tile decoration, but time and weather had removed much of it. However, there were still lots of rectangular blue tiles lying on the ground, and this is a photo of one of them. These minarets may not last a lot longer. A busy road now passes between them, and one was weakened by a hit from a Russian shell during their occupation. There are very good descriptions of the Musalla before its destruction in Afghanistan Companion and Guide by Omrani, Leeming and Chatwin. I think my copy was published in 2011. It's an excellent book and is usually available on eBay very cheaply. The following day we decided to visit the massive construction of the citadel. Some of its defensive towers still then retain vestiges of Timurid tile decoration. Most of the structure was in use by the military and out of bounds to us. During the period between the Taliban takeovers, the citadel was sympathetically restored. The work involved hundreds of Afghan tradesmen, funds from the Aga Khan Trust for Culture, and about $2.4 million from the American and German governments. These photos show the stunning result. In the afternoon we walked to the Friday Mosque. This was an extensive and impressive building, mostly built between 1163 and 1202. The exterior was covered in tilework and looked fantastic as you approached. Surprisingly, this decoration was all post-1943 and produced in the mosque's own tile factory. Near the front of this photo you can see that the pattern is made up of small individually shaped tiles, each colour fired at its optimum temperature. These are then fitted together rather like an upside-down jigsaw puzzle. The whole is then plastered to make a panel which can be fitted to a wall. Further back you can see a pattern being prepared on a curved surface to match the diameter of a minaret. Finished panels are stacked at the sides. Within the mosque were vestiges of early tile work, some of which dated back to the 12th century, the same date as the minaret of Jam. Later we returned to the bazaar. Our time was short, but we couldn't leave Herat without visiting Gazagah, primarily a shrine dedicated to the Sufi poet and mystic Khwaja Abdullah Ansari. He died in the year 1088, at the age of 84, reputedly as a result of stone throwing by a group of boys. As receivers of stone throwing ourselves, we felt a certain sympathy. It was situated a few miles away, so we took a two-wheeled horse-drawn conveyance called a gharry, and there were lots to choose from. I didn't photograph one at the time, but this 1946 photo shows what they looked like. In 1969 it was a haven of peace situated near a small village in an isolated position on a low hill. There was a traditional entranceway, or ivan, which opened onto a courtyard. All four walls had ivans. There was no recent restoration, but there were many examples of exquisite tile work, some of which showed Chinese influence. The tomb of Ansari itself was protected by a green-painted lattice enclosure. There were, however, many other tombs, mostly of white marble. Sitting around the tombs were several old men with flowing white beards and turbans. As in other Afghan religious sites, there were flocks of white pigeons. The gharry journey cost 40 Afs, but we gave the guy 50 because we'd been quite a long time. On the way back we saw two black, intricately carved tombstones sitting on what looked like the last remains of some building. They looked as if they should have been preserved in a museum, and this is one of them. I've never been able to find out any information about them. We planned to eventually leave Afghanistan via Kabul, and then travel the route taken by the 1842 fleeing British Army through the Kabul Gorge to Jalalabad. From there we could travel via the Khyber Pass to Peshawar. There were two practical paths, the anti-clockwise route via Kandahar and Ghazni, or the clockwise route via Maimana to Mazar-e-Sharif. From Mazar one could travel by the Soviet-built Salang route that pierced the Hindu Kush mountains by means of the infamous Salang Tunnel. At the time, this was the second highest tunnel in the world. The Kandahar route was much easier, but we wanted to see Mazar and the ruins of the nearby Silk Route city of Balkh. We had heard that the buses via Maimana normally took 6 days to get from Herat to Mazar. Unfortunately, in July 1969, no buses were making the trip. Stories varied. Some said that it was a security situation, others that rockfalls had made the route temporarily impossible. But either way, it couldn't be attempted. The alternative was to fly via Ariana. This Afghan company had started with Boeing DC-3s, originally operating from Kandahar. There were plenty of DC-3s available after World War II, converted from wartime Dakotas. I had flown in a DC-3 in 1956, on a flight from Lipny, which had a grass runway, to Beauvais. However, with Soviet help, an airport was built at Kabul. This was near government agencies, but at 1790 metres and surrounded by 7,000-metre mountains, it had its problems. In 1956, Pan Am bought a 49% stake in Ariana and helped with its development. Douglas DC-6s were used for international flights. In the late 50s, early 60s, the Americans built a large airport at Kandahar as an insurance against a war with the Soviet Union. In March 1968, Ariana took delivery of their first jet, a Boeing 727, so the DC-6s were mostly relegated to internal flights. There's a very interesting book, Prelude to Afghanistan, by John G. Bigelow, which describes Ariana in detail. In January 1969, their sole jet, a Boeing 727, had crashed at Gatwick, but that was quickly replaced. The cost of the flight to Mazar was only 750 AFs, which was £4.19 English, so although we preferred to travel by land, we bought a couple of tickets. On the Monday we checked out of our hotel and walked to the Ariana office. The DC-6 flight only took an hour and a half. It flew over the mountains very low, and a couple of Afghan passengers knelt in the aisle to pray. Ross took some photos en route, and also of our approach to Mazar. Ariana's money spinner was flights to Mecca for the Hajj. For most of the passengers it was their first journey in an airplane. There was a story that passengers had lit a fire in the aisle to make tea, but I can't vouch for its veracity. In Mazar we found a hotel, dumped our rucksacks and explored the town. To our amazement we were able to buy some Yugoslavian corned beef, the same type that we'd bought during our Topolino trip. Passing one shop we were regaled with shouts of heroin, cocaine, hashish, as if they were selling vegetables. We often stopped at tea houses, partly to fill our drinking bottles from a samovar, because we didn't trust water from a tap. The following morning we took a small bus to Balkh for 5 AFs. We passed through the mud walls of the town and reached what is known as the Green Mosque, the late Timurid shrine of Khwaja Pasha. At the time of our visit it was badly damaged, but enough remained of its ribbed dome and exterior tile decoration to see what a magnificent sight it must have been when first constructed. In particular it had twin corkscrew pillars which were unique in Afghanistan. The arrival of a camel caravan added to the scene. The ancient city was a short walk away. The Balkh of history was Alexander's headquarters for his 3-year campaign north of the Oxus River. It was here that he married Roxanne, reputedly the most beautiful woman in Asia. However, it was not until 2002 that Hellenistic remains were discovered, which confirmed its identity. The walls of the city were spectacular, but it's best viewed from the air. Another camel caravan arrived. We returned to Mazar in a shared Russian jeep. The sharing exceeded the transport. There were several stops on the way, and each time the sharing required that the passengers had to bump start it. We arrived at the same time as an Afghan army contingent. For the rest of the day we examined the central Friday Mosque. One claim says that Ali, the Prophet's son-in-law, was buried here following his assassination in 661. However, an alternative claim puts the burial in Kufa, Iraq. All knowledge of the final resting place was lost until the beginning of the 12th century, when its existence was revealed to a mullah in a dream. As a result, the Seljuk Sultan Sanjay ordered a shrine to be built in 1136. Genghis Khan heard that a great treasure was buried beneath the building and destroyed it in a fruitless search. In 1481, as a result of a second revelation, the Timurid Sultan Husayn Bai Kara, he of the Herat Musala, ordered an extensive shrine to be constructed. None of the 15th century decoration remains. What we see today is a relatively modern restoration. However, it is an impressive sight. The journey called, so we found a bus station and bought tickets to Kabul for the following day. On the Wednesday morning we joined the bus and it set out on the Kunduz road. About a quarter of an hour later the bus suddenly speeded up. We then saw that we were being chased by a lorry which was blowing its horn. There were several scruffy individuals hanging out and waving us to stop. Our driver turned left off the road and started charging across the desert. The lorry followed us. We then started to go in large diameter circles and spirals, but there was no shaking off our pursuers. Eventually our driver gave up and came to a halt. We wondered if we were about to be robbed and slipped our watches into our rucksacks. We'd heard that in similar cases the robbers went for jewellery, rings and watches. Hopefully they would class us as hippies who wouldn't have anything valuable. An important-looking, well-fed passenger got up and, without a word to the driver, strode across to the lorry. There was some gesticulation from the pursuers, but they soon drove off. On his return he indicated to our driver to move on. It turned out that the pursuers were actually members of the Afghan army who had not been given their accustomed bribe, an important part of their earnings. Some distance further on we turned right and headed for the infamous Salang Pass. This had been built by the Soviets, and we noted that the hairpins were wide enough for tank transporters, a use to which they were later put. This route through the Hindu Kush Mountains is the important path between North and South Afghanistan. The scenery was spectacular. In the winter it is subject to avalanches and is extremely dangerous. As a protection, in the worst spots there are galleries. Part of the way up we stopped at a tea house. There was a stream running behind it. This had been put to two uses. At the higher end, customers had arranged wood and rope beds to take advantage of its cooling powers. A little further down it served the latrines. We sat beneath some mulberry trees. An interesting truck arrived. Basically it was a small tanker, but a bed had been fitted on top and there was provision for other travellers over the front wings. The fuel came via a tube from a can on the roof. The driver threw a bucket of water over the engine and walked into the tea house. It reminded me of the vehicle that I'd learned to drive in, bought between three of us for £10, an open-top Ford 8. We did many miles in it. Once, when carrying a large number of people, we had to drive down the centre of the cambered road to prevent the body rubbing on the wheels. The introduction of the MOT had put an end to it. "Not fit to be on the road," said the mechanic. Eventually we reached the Salang tunnel itself. It was 1.66 miles long and badly ventilated. In 1982, during the Soviet occupation, a fuel tanker exploded in the tunnel. It caused fires and a severe traffic jam. The drivers of the following vehicles didn't turn off their engines. Some estimates put the deaths due to fire, smoke inhalation and carbon monoxide poisoning at 3,000. Mostly Soviet soldiers in 30 buses. The Soviets maintained the death toll was nearer 200, but Western experts think this was a cover-up. In 2022, another fuel tanker exploded, killing at least 30, but we passed through without incident. On the way down on the other side, we saw fortified villages. The bus arrived in Kabul after dark, which made it more difficult to find a suitable hotel. Our choice turned out to be situated over the kitchen of a restaurant. This provided two problems. It was too hot, and we had to spend about half an hour swatting mosquitoes before going to sleep. However, the swatting did become a rather boisterous game. The next day we walked along the northern bank of the Kabul River as far as the Shah-do-Shamshira Mosque. This strange edifice was built in the 1920s, during the reign of the reformer King Amanullah. It has multiple levels, and the style is Italian Baroque. In summertime, the river is reduced to a stream. You can see that a temporary dam had been built so that brave souls could swim. It must have been terribly polluted. We then crossed the river and started walking back on the other side. This view of the river shows the activities it was used for. To our right was the bazaar. It was extremely busy, and unlike the Kapali Çarşı in Istanbul, most of the goods on sale were for local consumption. One of the enterprises was making coffins, always a reliable business in Afghanistan. Only the children seemed to take any notice of us. We reached the tomb of Timur Shah Durrani, which was in a poor state of repair. Since then it's been extensively restored. In 1969, Afghanistan was under the rule of the King Nadir Shah. He was a reformer, and in the modern areas women were walking around unveiled. There were even miniskirts on view. However, here in the Bazaar district, women were only to be seen in blue head-to-toe burqas. We returned to the other side of the river and walked through Zanagar Park. There were lots of children playing in a stream. On the edge of the park was the Abdul Rahman Mausoleum. Probably the most historic building is the Bala Hisar, or High Fortress. This 1879 photo is probably the best photo of it. It has had a checkered career and had fallen into neglect until in 1773 Timur Shah Durrani came to power and moved the capital to Kabul. It was then repaired and strengthened. It played an important part in the First and Second Anglo-Afghan Wars, but was restored again in 1880. Since then it's been neglected, damaged and restored more than once, including in the Communist Civil War and during the attentions of the Taliban. The next picture shows a relatively recent restoration. Our time was limited, so after a couple more days we decided to move on to Peshawar in Pakistan. The bus journey started through the Kabul Gorge. This photo gives the idea. Further on there were attractive areas with beautiful blue lakes. We were following the route of the disastrous 1842 British retreat from Kabul. It was a massacre. Of the 16,000 Anglo-Indian force, only one soldier survived, an army doctor, William Brydon. This is the famous painting by Elizabeth Thompson showing him reaching the safety of the garrison at Jalalabad. Our stop at Jalalabad was less dramatic. The Khyber Pass was not what we expected. It was much wider than the Kabul Gorge. There was more than one route through it. However, it bore many signs of more dangerous times, with old fortifications and commemorative plaques. Peshawar was very interesting. There was an extensive bazaar area with a wide variety of trades being carried out in full view, particularly metalworking and ceramics, and even dentistry. The buildings were interspersed with trees, some of which were growing from the rooftops. Before leaving Peshawar, we telephoned Khaliq's cousin, Mr. Gori, and said that we would like to meet him and would arrive in Lahore by train on the 29th of July. He said he would expect us. On the 29th there was torrential rain, and the train travelled through flooded areas. By the time we reached Lahore station the rain had stopped, but it seemed to have caused confusion. The telephones were out of order. We talked to an official who didn't seem very interested until we showed him a message on Mr. Gori's headed notepaper. For some reason this had an electric effect. We were taken to an area where there was a working phone. Our new helper rang the number. "My name is Farooq Chowdhury, sir. I have 2 English people here who would like to talk to you." Mr. Gori said that he'd sent a car which should be outside the station waiting for us. We thanked the beaming official and went out to look for the car. The only option was a large, smart American car. Leaning against it was a uniformed chauffeur. He picked up our disreputable baggage and put it in the boot. Ros had spilt a bottle of washing-up liquid in hers, so it wasn't at its best. We were whisked away across Lahore and taken to Folletti's. I'd heard of Folletti's. It was a smart hotel, and at the time of the Raj, a place of consequence. Outside were two attendants with tall turbans. I went in, crossed the floor to a desk, and spoke to the receptionist. "I'm afraid there's a misunderstanding. We've been brought here, but this is beyond our price range." "Oh, no, your suite has been arranged. It's all on Mr. Gorry's account," was the reply. We and our baggage were escorted to the suite. There was a living room, a bedroom, and a bathroom, all beautifully furnished. I picked up a phone and got an outside line. I dialed Mr. Gorry and announced our arrival. "Was everything okay?" he said. Unfortunately, he would not be able to see us that day, but he would send one of his sons to take us round and see some sights. The son later arrived and we set off to see the Shalimar Gardens. For the next few days the sequence continued. Mr. Gorry was unfortunately too busy, but a son would escort us. We visited Jahangir's tomb, the Badashi Mosque, the fort, plus other places I can't remember. After several days, we said that due to shortage of time we would have to leave for Multan. At that, Mr. Gorry said he would arrive in the evening, and we could have a meal together. He talked about his business visits to London. Apparently he generally stayed at the Dorchester Hotel in Park Lane. The meal had several courses, and he ordered a very expensive bottle of wine. And a good time was had by all, and we thanked him profusely for his hospitality. We had telephoned Khaliq's relations in Multan to tell them about our arrival, so the following day we went to the station to buy our tickets. Rather than a kiosk, we were directed to an office. It was very Dickensian. A small man sat behind a large desk, on which were piles of forms and an impressive array of rubber stamps. The rest of the room was full of files and folders in untidy piles. The controller of this empire was very eager to chat, and we learned lots of information about his family. It was soon to be his daughter's birthday, and he wanted to buy her a nice present. Suddenly he noticed Rosalind's watch. This then became the topic of conversation. He wanted to buy it. He was very earnest, so in the end we decided to let him have it for a fairly low price. Eventually we got round to the business of tickets to Multan. This, of course, turned out to be a form, but we were surprised not to get some rubber stamps. We made our way to the platform, and since we hadn't eaten for a bit, Ros cooked a meal based on one of the tins of Yugoslavian corned beef. There was some time to kill, but there was plenty of activity, so it wasn't boring. As the train approached the station, a band of children ran up the line and jumped on. Apparently their object was to take over parts of the carriages and sell on empty seats for a nominal sum. We found an area that was surprisingly devoid of occupants. It turned out that this had been reserved for the Lahore Football Team, who were going to Multan to play a match. They were very kind and said that we could stay. However, a bit later on they wanted me to sing a song. At school we'd played rugby, not football, and the snatches of rugby songs that I remembered were not suitable for Muslim audiences. Trying to think of an alternative, I remembered Abdul Abulbul Amir. This was written in 1877, during the war between Russia and the Turks, and recorded in 1927 by Frank Crummett. I thought it might go down well, and it went something like this. The sons of the Prophet are brave men and bold, and quite unaccustomed to fear, but the bravest by far in the ranks of the Shah was Abdul Abulbul Amir. If you wanted a man to encourage the van, or harass the foe from the rear, storm, fort, or redoubt, you had only to shout for Abdul Abulbul Amir. Now heroes were plenty and well known to fame in the troops that were led by the Tsar, and the bravest of these was a man by the name of Ivan Skavinsky Skavar. One day this bold Russian he shouldered his gun and donned his most truculent sneer. Downtown he did go, where he trod on the toe of Abdul the Bulbul Emir. Young man, quoth Abdul, has life grown so dull that you wish to end your career? Vile infidel, no, you have trod on the toe of Abdul the Bulbul Emir. So take your last look at sunshine and brook, and send your regrets to the Tsar, for by this I imply you are going to die, Count Ivan Skavinsky Skavar. Then this bold Mameluke drew his trusty skibook, singing Allah Akbar, and with murderous intent he ferociously went for Ivan Skavinsky Skavar. I didn't remember the rest of the bloodthirsty verses, but I was glad to recount that both heroes ended up dead. A victory of the Christian Ivan over the Mohammedan Abdul would not have gone down well. But being footballers, they understood an honourable draw. Despite the quality of the singing, it was a great success. But the problem was they wanted more. I'd gone to school in Cornwall, so considered giving them the Cornish national anthem. But then I had to explain who the Cornish were and why they didn't like King James. So in the end, I fell back on a song we were taught in junior school, The Mermaid. I didn't remember many of the verses, and I don't think they'd heard of mermaids, but it really didn't matter. It was the raging seas and the stormy winds of the chorus that they liked. After this, we were able to get some sleep, and when we eventually reached Multan, we wished the team luck with their match and said goodbye. This is the end of part 2, and in part 3 we run into difficulties and dangers.